the Mahabharata of Krishna-Dwaipayana Vyasa. Translated into English prose from the original Sanskrit text by Pratap Chandra Roy C.I.E. This free ebook has been downloaded from holybooks.com. Vana Parva. Lomisa said, the Kalakayas then having recourse to that receptacle of waters, which is the abode of Varuna, began their operations for the destruction of the universe. And during the darkness of the night those angry Daityas began to devour the munis they found in woody retreats and sacred spots. And those wicked wretches devoured in the asylum of Vasishtha Brahmanas to the number of 180, besides 9 other ascetics. And, proceeding to the asylum of Chavna that was inhabited by many brahmacharis, they devoured a century of Brahmanas that lived upon fruit and roots alone. And they began to do all this during the darkness of the night, while they entered the depths of the sea by day. And they slew a full score of Brahmanas of subdued souls and leading a brahmacharya mode of life and living upon air and water alone, in the retreat of Bharadwaja. And it was thus that those Danvas the Kalakayas, intoxicated with prowess of arms and their lives nearly run out, gradually invaded all the asylums of the rishis during the darkness of the night, slaughtering numerous Brahmanas. And, O best of men, although the Danvas behaved in this way towards the ascetics in woody retreats, yet men failed to discover anything of them. And every morning people saw the dead bodies of munis emaciated with frugal diet, lying on the ground. And many of those bodies were without flesh and without blood, without marrow, without entrails, and with limbs separated from one another. And here and there lay on the ground heaps of bones like masses of conch shells. And the earth was scattered over with the sacrificial contents of broken jars and shattered ladles for pouring libations of clarified butter and with the sacred fires kept with care by the ascetics. And the universe afflicted with the terror of the Kalakayas, being destitute of Vedic studies and worships and sacrificial festivals and religious rites, became entirely cheerless. And, O king, when men began to perish in this way, the survivors, afflicted with fear, fled for their lives in all directions. And some fled to caverns and some behind mountain streams and springs and some through fear of death, died without much ado. And some who were brave and mighty bowmen cheerfully went out and took great trouble in tracking the Danvas. Unable, however, to find them out, for the Asuras had sought refuge in the depths of the sea, these brave men came back to their homes gratified with the search. And, O Lord of men, when the universe was being thus destroyed, and when sacrificial festivals and religious rites had been suspended, the gods became deeply afflicted. And gathering together with Indra in their midst they began, from fear, to take counsel of one another. And repairing unto the exalted and uncreate Narayana, that unvanquished god of Vaikuntha, the celestials sought his protection. And bowing unto the slayer of Madhu, the gods addressed him, saying, O Lord, thou art the creator, the protector, and the slayer of ourselves as well as of the universe. It is thou who hast created this universe with its mobile and immobile creatures. O thou of eyes like lotus leaves, it was thou who in days of yore hadst for the benefit of all creatures raised from the sea the sunken earth, assuming also the form of a boar. And, O best of male beings, assuming also the form of half man and half lion, thou hadst slain in days of yore that ancient Daitya of mighty prowess known by the name of Hiranyakasipu. And that other great Asura also, Vali by name, was incapable of being slain by any one. Assuming the form of a dwarf, thou exiledst him from the 3 worlds. O Lord, it was by thee that wicked Asura, Jamba by name, who was a mighty bowman and who always obstructed sacrifices, was slain. Achievements like these, which cannot be counted, are thine. O slayer of Madhu, we who have been afflicted with fear, have thee for our refuge. It is for this, O God of gods, that we inform thee of our present troubles. Protect the worlds, the gods, and Sakra also, from a terrible fear. Thus ends the 102nd section in the Tirthaitara Parva of the Vana Parva. Section 103, Tirthayatra Parva continued. The celestials said, through thy favor it is that all born beings of the four kinds increase, and they being created, propitiate the dwellers of heaven by offerings made to the gods and the names of departed forefathers. Thus it is that people, protected by thee and free from trouble, live depending on one another, and so increase. Now this peril hath befallen the people. We do not know by whom are Brahmanas being killed during the night. If the Brahmanas are destroyed, the earth itself will meet with destruction, and if the earth cometh to an end, heaven also will cease to exist. O mighty armed one, O Lord of the universe, we beseech thee to act so, that all the worlds protected by thee may not come to an end, so it may please thee. Vishnu said, Ye gods! To me is known the reason of the destruction of the born beings. I shall speak of it to you. Listen with minds free from tribulation. There exists an exceedingly fierce host, known by the name of Kalakeyas. They, under the lead of Vritra, were devastating the whole universe. And when they saw that Vritra was slain by the sagacious Indra endued with 1,000 eyes, they, to preserve their lives, entered into the ocean, that abode of Varuna. And having entered the ocean, abounding with sharks and crocodiles, they at night killed the saints at this spot with the view of exterminating the people. But they cannot be slain, as they have taken shelter within the sea. Ye should therefore think of some expedient to dry up the ocean. Who save Agastya is capable of drying up the sea. And without drying up the ocean, these demons cannot be assailed by any other means. Hearing these words of Vishnu, the gods took the permission of Brahma, who lives at the best of all regions, and went to the hermitage of Agastya. Then they beheld the high-souled Agastya, the son of Varuna, of resplendent mien, and waited upon by saints, even as Brahma is waited upon by celestials. And approaching him, they addressed the son of Mitra and Varuna at the hermitage, magnanimous, and unswerving, and looking like an embodiment of pious works piled together, and glorified him by reciting his deeds. The deities said, Thou wert formerly the refuge of the gods when they were oppressed by Nahusha. Thorn of the world that he was thrown down from his throne of heaven from the celestial regions. Vindhya, the foremost of all mountains, suddenly began to increase his height, from a wrathful competition with the sun, i.e. to rival him in altitude. But he hath ceased to increase, as he was unable to disobey thy command. And when darkness hath covered the world, the born beings were harassed by death, but having obtained thee for a protector, they attained the utmost security. Whenever we are beset by perils, thy reverence is always our refuge. For this reason it is that we solicit a boon from thee, as thou ever grantest the boon solicited of thee. Thus ends the 103rd section in the Tirthaitara Parva of the Vana Parva. Section 104, Tirthayatra Parva continued. Yudhishthira said, O great saint, I am desirous of hearing in detail why it was that Vindhya, made senseless with wrath, suddenly began to increase his bulk. Lomisa said, the sun between his rising and setting used to revolve round that monarch of mountains, the great Meru of golden luster. And seeing this, the mountain Vindhya spake to Surya, saying, as thou every day goest round Meru and honourest him by thy circumambulations, do thou even the same by me, O maker of light. Thus addressed, the sun replied to the great mountain, saying, I do not of my own will honour this mountain by my circumambulations. By those who have built this universe hath that path been assigned to me. Thus addressed, the mountain suddenly began to increase from wrath, desirous, O chastiser of foes, of obstructing the path of the sun and the moon. And all the assembled gods came to Vindhya, the mighty king of mountains, and tried to dissuade him from his course. But he heeded not what they said. And then all the assembled gods went to the saint, living in the hermitage, engaged in the practice of austerities, and the very best of persons devoted to virtue, and stated all that happened to Agastya, possessed of exceeding marvelous power. The gods said, this king of hills, Vindhya, giving way to wrath, is stopping the path of the sun and the moon, and also the course of the stars. O foremost of Brahmanas! O thou great in gifts! Excepting thyself, there is none who can prevent him, therefore do thou make him desist. Hearing these words of the gods, the Brahmana came to the mountain. And he with his wife, having arrived there, came near Vindhya and spake to him, saying, O thou best of mountains! I wish to have a path given to me by thee, as for some purpose, I shall have to go to the southern region. Until my return, do thou wait for me. And when I have returned, O king of mountains, thou mayst increase in bulk as much as thou pleasest. And, O slayer of foes! Having made this compact with Vindhya up to the present day, Varuna's son doth not return from the southern region. Thus have I, asked by thee, narrated to thee why Vindhya doth not increase in bulk, by reason of the power of Agastya. Now, O king, hear how the Kalakeyas were killed by the gods, after they had obtained their prey from Agastya. Having heard the words of the gods, Agastya, the son of Mitra and Varuna, said, wherefore are ye come? What boon do ye solicit from me? Thus addressed by him, the deities then spake to the saint, saying, this deed we ask thee to achieve, viz., to drink up the great ocean, O magnanimous saint. Then we shall be able to slay those enemies of the gods, known by the name of Kalakeyas, together with all their adherents. Having heard the words of the gods, the saint said, let it be so. I shall do even what ye desire, and that which will conduce to the great happiness of men. Having said this, he then proceeded to the ocean, the lord of rivers, accompanied by sages, ripe in the practice of penances, and also by the deities, O thou who leadest an excellent life. And men and snakes, celestial choristers, yakshas and kinnaras followed the magnanimous saints, desirous of witnessing that wonderful event. Then they came up all together near to the sea, of awful roar, dancing, as it were, with its billows bounding with the breeze, and laughing with masses of froth, and stumbling at the caves, and thronged with divers kinds of sharks, and frequented by flocks of various birds. And the deities, accompanied by Agastya and celestial choristers and huge snakes and highly gifted saints, approached the immense watery waste. Thus ends the 104th section in the Tirthaitara Parva of the Vana Parva. Section 105, Tirthayatra Parva continued. Lomesa said, that blessed saint, the son of Varuna, having reached the sea, spake unto the assembled gods, and the saints gathered together, saying, I surely am going to drink up the ocean, that abode of the God of waters. Be ye quickly ready with those preparations which it devolves upon you to make. Having spoken these few words, the unswerving offspring of Mitra and Varuna, full of wrath, began to drink up the sea, while all the worlds stood observing the deed. Then the gods, together with Indra, seeing how the sea was being drunk up, were struck with mighty amazement, and glorified him with laudatory words, saying, Thou art our protector, and the providence itself for men, and also the creator of the worlds. By thy favor the universe with its gods may possibly be saved from havoc. And the magnanimous one, glorified by the gods, while the musical instruments of celestial choristers were playing all round, and while celestial blossoms were showered upon him, rendered waterless the wide ocean. And seeing the wide ocean rendered devoid of water, the host of gods was exceedingly glad, and taking up choice weapons of celestial forge, fell to slaying the demons with courageous hearts, and they, assailed by the magnanimous gods of great strength and swift of speed, and roaring loudly, were unable to withstand the onset of their fleet and valorous foes, those residents of the heavenly regions, O descendant of Bharata. And those demons, attacked by the gods, bellowing loudly for a moment, carried on terrible conflict. They had been in the first instance burnt by the force of penances performed by the saints, who had matured themselves. Therefore, the demons, though they tried to the utmost, were at last slaughtered by the gods. And decked with brooches of gold, and bearing on their persons earrings and armlets, the demons, when slain, looked beautiful indeed, like pulsar trees when full of blossoms. Then, O best of men, a few, the remnant of those that were killed of the Kalakaya race, having rent asunder the goddess earth, took refuge at the bottom of the nether regions. And the gods, when they saw that the demons were slain, with divers speeches, glorified the mighty saint, and spake the following words. O thou of mighty arms, by thy favor men have attained a mighty blessing, and the Kalakayas, of ruthless strength, have been killed by thy power, O creator of beings. Fill the sea now, O mighty armed one, give up again the water drunk up by thee. Thus addressed, the blessed and mighty saint replied, That water in sooth hath been digested by me. Some other expedient, therefore, must be thought of by you, if ye desire to make endeavor to fill the ocean. Hearing this speech of that saint of matured soul, the assembled gods were struck with both wonder and sadness, O great king. And thereupon, having bidden adieu to each other, and bowed to the mighty saint, all the born beings went their way. And the gods with Vishnu came to Brahma, and having held consultation again, with the view of filling up the sea, they with joined hands spake about replenishing it. Thus ends the 105th section in the Tirtha Parva of the Vana Parva. Section 106, Tirthayatra Parva continued. Lomesa said, Then gathered together, Brahma, the grandfather of men, thus addressed, Go ye, O gods, whither your pleasure may lead you, or your desire conduct you. It will take a long course of time for the ocean to resume its wonted state. The occasion will be furnished by the agnates of the great king Bhagirath. Hearing the words of the universal grandfather, Brahma, all the foremost gods went their way, biding the day when the ocean was to be filled again. Yudhishthira said, What was that occasion, O saint? And how did the agnates of Bhagirath furnish the same? And how was the ocean refilled by the interference of Bhagirath? O saint, who deemest thy religious practices as thy only treasure, O thou of the priestly class, I wish to hear the account of the achievements of the king, narrated in detail by thyself. Vasampayana said, thus addressed by the magnanimous and virtuous king, he, the chief of men of the priestly class, narrated the achievements of the high-souled king Sagra. Lomisa said, there was born in the family of the Ikshaku tribe, a ruler of the earth named Sagra, endued with beauty and strength. And that same king of a dreaded name was sonless, O descendant of Bharata. And he carried havoc through the tribes of the Hyayas and the Taljangas, brought under subjection the whole of the military caste, and so ruled over his own kingdom. And, O most praiseworthy of the descendants of Bharata, O chief of the Bharata race, he had 2 wives proud of their beauty and of their youth, one a princess of the Vidarbha race, and the other of the royal line of C.I.E. And, O chief of kings, that same ruler of men, betook himself to the mountain Kailas, accompanied by both his wives, and with the desire of having a son became engaged in the practice of exceeding austere penances. And being engaged in the practice of rigid austerities, and also employed in the contemplation known by the name of yoga, he obtained the sight of the magnanimous God with 3 eyes, the slayer of the demon called Tripura, the worker of blessings for all beings, the externally existent one, the ruling being, the holder of the Pinaka bow, carrying in his hand his well-known weapon the trident, the God of 3 eyes, the repository of eternal peace, the ruler of all those that are fierce, capable of assuming very many forms, and the lord of the goddess Uma. And that same ruler of men, of mighty arms, as soon as he beheld the god, that giver of boons, fell down at his feet, with both his queens, and proffered a prayer to have a son. And the god Shiva, well pleased with him, spake thus to that most righteous of the rulers of men, attended by his 2 wives, saying, O Lord of men, considering the astrological moment at which thou hast proffered thy prayer to me, 60,000 sons, O foremost of choice men, valorous and characterized by exceeding pride, will be born in one of thy 2 wives here. But they all, O ruler of the earth, shall perish together. In the other wife, however, will be born a single valiant son, who will perpetuate thy race. Having said this to him, the god Rudra, Shiva, vanished from sight at that very spot, and that same king Sagra now came back to his own abode accompanied by his 2 wives, exceedingly delighted at heart for what had happened then. And, O most praiseworthy of the sons of Manu, i.e. men, there the 2 lotus-eyed wives of him, the princess of Vidarbha and the princess of C.I.E came ere long to be with child. And afterwards, on the due day, the princess of Vidarbha brought forth something of the shape of a god, and the princess of C.I.E gave birth to a boy as beautiful as a god. Then the ruler of the earth made up his mind to throw away the god, when he heard, proceeding from the sky, speech uttered in a grave and solemn voice, O king, do thou not be guilty of this hasty act, thou shouldst not abandon thy sons. Take out the seeds from the god and let them be preserved with care in steaming vessels partly filled with clarified butter. Then thou wilt get, O scion of Bharata's race, 60,000 sons, O ruler of men. The great god Shiva hath spoken that thy sons are to be born in this manner. Let not therefore thy mind be turned away therefrom. Thus ends the 106th section in the Tirthayatara Parva of the Vana Parva. Section 107, Tirthayatara Parva continued. Lomisa said, O most righteous of kings, When he heard these words proceeding from the sky, he had faith therein, and did all that he was directed to do, O chief of the men of Bharata's race. Then the ruler of men took separately each of the seeds and then placed these divisions of the god in vessels filled with clarified butter. And intent on the preservation of his sons, he provided a nurse for every receptacle. Then after a long time there arose 60,000 exceedingly powerful sons of that same king, gifted with unmeasured strength they were born, O ruler of earth, to that saint-like king, by Rudra's favor. And they were terrible, and their acts were ruthless. And they were able to ascend and roam about in the sky, and being numerous themselves, despised everybody, including the gods. And they would chase even the gods, the Gandharvas, and the Rakshasas and all the born beings, being themselves valiant and addicted to fighting. Then all people, harassed by the dull-headed sons of Sagra, united with all the gods, went to Brahma as their refuge. And them addressed the blessed grandfather of all beings, Brahma, go ye your way, ye gods, together with all these men. In a not very long space of time, there will come about, O gods, a great and exceedingly terrible destruction of Sagra's sons, caused by the deed perpetrated by them. Thus addressed, those same gods and men, O Lord of the sons of Manu, bade adieu to the grandfather, and went back to whence they had come. Then, O chief of Bharata's race, after the expiry of very many days, the mighty King Sagra accepted the consecration for performing the rites of a horse sacrifice, and his horse began to roam over the world, protected by his sons. And when the horse reached the sea, waterless and frightful to behold, although the horse was guarded with very great care, it suddenly vanished at the very spot it stood upon. Then, O respected sir, those same sons of Sagra imagined the same fine horse to have been stolen, and returning to their father, narrated how it had been stolen out of sight. And thereupon he addressed them, saying, Go ye and search for the horse in all the cardinal points. Then, O great king, by this command of their father, they began to search for the horse in the cardinal points and throughout the whole surface of the earth. But all those sons of Sagra, all mutually united, could not find the horse, nor the person who had stolen it. And coming back then, they with joined palms thus addressed their father, standing before them, O protector of men, O ruler of the earth, O king, by thy command, the whole of this world with its hills and its forest tracts, with its seas, and its woods, and its islands, with its rivulets and rivers and caves, hath been searched through by us. But we cannot find either the horse, or the thief who had stolen the same. And hearing the words, the same king became senseless with wrath, and then told them all, carried away by destiny, Go ye all, may ye never return. Search ye again for the horse. Without that sacrificial horse, ye must never return, my boys. And those same sons of Sagra accepted this command of their father, and once more began to search through the entire world. Now these heroes saw a rift on the surface of the earth. And having reached this pit, the sons of Sagra began to excavate it. And with spades and pickaxes they went on digging the sea, making the utmost efforts. And that same abode of Varuna, namely the ocean, being thus excavated by the united sons of Sagra and rent and cut on all sides round, was placed in a condition of the utmost distress. And the demons and snakes and Rakshasas and various other animated beings began to utter distressful cries, while being killed by Sagra's sons. And hundreds and thousands of animated beings were beheld with severed heads and separated trunks and with their skins and bones and joints rent asunder and broken. Thus they went on digging the ocean, which was the abode of Varuna, and an exceedingly long space of time expired in this work, but still the horse was not found. Then, O Lord of earth, towards the northeastern region of the sea, the incensed sons of Sagra dug down as far as the lower world, and there they beheld the horse, roaming about on the surface of the ground. And they saw the magnanimous Kapila, who looked like a perfect mass of splendor. And having beheld him shining with his brightness, just as the fire shineth with its flames, they, O king, seeing the horse, were flushed with delight. And they being incensed, sent forward by their fate, paid no heed to the presence of the magnanimous Kapila, and ran forward with a view to seizing the horse. Then, O great king, Kapila, the most righteous of saints, he whom the great sages name as Kapila Vasudeva, assumed a fiery look, and the mighty saint shot flames towards them, and thereby burnt down the dull-headed sons of Sagra. And Narada, whose practice of austerities was very great, when he beheld them reduced to ashes, came to Sagra's side, and gave the information to him. And when the king learned this terrible news which proceeded from the mouth of the saint, for nearly an hour he remained sad, and then he bethought himself of what Shiva had said. Then sending for Ansuman, the son of Asmajas, and his own grandson, he, O chief of Bharata's race, spake the following words: those same 60,000 sons of unmeasured strength, having encountered Kapila's wrath, have met their death on my account. And, O my boy of stainless character, thy father also hath been forsaken by me, in order to discharge my duty as a king, and being desirous of doing good to my subjects. Yudhishthira said, O saint, whose sole wealth consists in religious practices, tell me for what reason Sagra, the foremost of kings, abandoned his own begotten so endued with valor, an act so difficult for all other men. Lomisa said, a son was born to Sagra, known by the name of Asmajas, he who was given birth to by the princes of Sivi. And he used to seize by throat the feeble children of the townsmen, and threw them while screaming into the river. And thereupon the townsmen, overwhelmed with terror and grief, met together, and all standing with joined palms, besought Sagra in the following way: O great king, thou art our protector from the dreaded peril of attack from a hostile force. Therefore it is proper for thee to deliver us from the frightful danger, proceeding from Asmajas. And the most righteous of the rulers of men, having heard this frightful news from his subjects, for nearly an hour remained sad, and then spake to his ministers, saying, this day from the city let my son Asmajas be driven forth. If ye wish to do what will be acceptable to me, let this be quickly done. And, O protector of men, those same ministers, thus addressed by the king, performed in a hurry exactly what the king had commanded them to do. Thus have I narrated to thee how the magnanimous Sagra banished his son, with a view to the welfare of the residents of the town. I shall now fully narrate to thee what Ansuman of the powerful Bug was told by Sagra. Listen to me. Sagra said, O my boy, sore am I at heart for having abandoned thy father, on account of the death of my sons, and also on being unsuccessful in getting back the horse. Therefore, O grandson, harassed with grief and confounded with the obstruction to my religious rites as I am, thou must bring back the horse and deliver me from hell. Thus addressed by the magnanimous Sagra, Ansuman went with sorrow to that spot where the earth had been excavated. And by that very passage he entered into the sea, and beheld the illustrious Kapila and that same horse. And having beheld that ancient saint, most righteous of his order, looking like a mass of light, he bowed with his head to the ground, and informed him of the reason of his visit. Then, O great king, Kapila was pleased with Asanan, and that saint of virtuous soul told him to ask for a favor from him. And he in the first place prayed for the horse, for the purpose of using it in the sacrifice. In the second place he prayed for the purification of his fathers. Then the mighty chief of saints, Kapila, spake to him, saying, I shall grant thee everything that thou desirest, O stainless prince. May good luck be thine. In thee are fixed the virtues of forbearance, and truth, and righteousness. By thee hath Sagra had all his desires fulfilled. Thou art really a son to thy father, and by thy ability, the sons of Sagra will go to heaven, i.e., will be delivered from the consequences of their unhallowed death. And the son of thy son, with a view to purifying the sons of Sagra, will obtain the favor of the great god Shiva, by means of practicing great austerities, and will thus bring to this world the river that floweth in 3 separate streams, Ganga, O chief of men. May good luck be thine. Take thou with thee the sacrificial horse. Finish, my lad, the sacrificial rites of the magnanimous Sagra. Thus addressed by the illustrious Kapila, Ansuman took the horse with him, and came back to the sacrificial yard of the mighty-minded Sagra. Then he fell prostrate at the feet of the high-souled Sagra, who smelt him on the head and narrated all the events to him, all that had been seen and heard by him, and likewise the destruction of Sagra's sons. He also announced that the horse had been brought back to the sacrificial yard. And when King Sagra heard of this, he no more grieved on account of his sons. And he praised and honored Ansuman, and finished those same sacrificial rites. His sacrifice finished, Sagra was greeted honorably by all the gods, and he converted the sea, Varuna's dwelling place, into a son of himself. And the lotus-eyed King Sagra, having ruled his kingdom for a period of exceeding length, placed his grandson on the throne, full of responsibilities, and then ascended to heaven. And Ansuman likewise, O great king, virtuous in soul, ruled over the world as far as the edge of the sea, following the footprints of his father's father. His son was named Dilipa, versed in virtue. Upon him placing the duties of his sovereign post, Ansuman likewise departed this life. And then when Dilipa heard what an awful fate had overtaken his forefathers, he was sorely grieved and thought of the means of raising them. And the ruler of men made every great effort towards the descent of Ganga to the mortal world. But although trying to the utmost of his power, he could not bring about what he so much wished. And a son was born to him, known by the name of Bhagiratha, beauteous, and devoted to a virtuous life, and truthful, and free from feelings of malice. And Dilipa appointed him as king, and betook himself to the forest life. And, O best of all the scions of Bharata's race, that same King Dilipa devoted himself to a successful course of austerities, and at the end of sufficient period, from the forest departed to heaven. Thus ends the 107th section in the Tirthayatara Parva of the Vana Parva. Section 108, Tirthayatara Parva continued. Lomesa said, that same king, of a powerful bow, standing at the head of the surrounding, i.e., the occupant of an imperial throne, of a powerful car, i.e., possessing every great writing power, became the delight of the eyes and the soul of all the world. And he of the powerful arm came to learn how his forefathers had met an awful end from Kapila of mighty soul, and how they had been unable to attain the region of gods. And he with a sorrowful heart made over his kingly duties to his minister, and, O Lord of men, for practicing austerities, went to the side of the snowy mountain, the Himalayas. And, O most praiseworthy of men, desirous of extinguishing his sins by leading an austere life, and thereby obtaining the favor of the goddess Ganga, he visited that foremost of mountains Himalaya, and he beheld it adorned with peaks of divers forms full of mineral earth, besprinkled on all sides with drops from clouds which were resting themselves upon the breeze, beautified with rivers and groves and rocky spurs, looking like so many palaces in a city, attended upon by lions and tigers that had concealed themselves in their caves and pits, and also inhabited by birds of checkered forms, which were uttering divers sounds, such as the Bhringarajas, and Gandars, and Deshuhas, and watercocks, and peacocks and birds with 100 feathers, and Jivakas, and blackbirds, and chakoras of eyes furnished with black corners, and the birds that love their young. And he saw the mountain abounding in lotus plants growing in delightful reservoirs of water. And the cranes rendered it charming with their sounds, and the kinnaras and the celestial nymphs were seated on its stony slabs. And the elephants occupying the cardinal points had everywhere rubbed its trees with the end of their tusks, and the demigods of the Vidyadhara class frequented the hill. And it was full of various gems, and was also infested by snakes bearing terrible poison and of glowing tongues. And the mountain at places looked like massive gold, and elsewhere it resembled a silvery pile, and at some places it was like a sable heap of collyrium. Such was the snowy hill where the king now found himself. And that most praiseworthy of men at that spot betook himself to an awful austere course of life. And for 1,000 years his subsistence was nothing but water, fruit and roots. When, however, 1,000 years according to the calculation of gods had elapsed, then the great river Ganga, having assumed a material form, manifested to him her divine self. Ganga said, O great king, what dost thou desire of me? And what must I bestow on thee? Tell me the same, O most praiseworthy of men. I shall do as thou mayst ask me. Thus addressed, the king then made his reply to Ganga, the daughter of the snowy hill, saying, O grantress of boons, great river, my father's fathers, while searching for the horse, were sent by Kapila to the abode of the god of death. And those same 60,000 sons of Sagra of mighty soul, having met with the majestic Kapila, perished, to a soul in an instant of time. Having thus perished, there hath been no place for them in the region of heaven. O great river, I so long as thou dost not besprinkle those same bodies with thy water, there is no salvation for these same Sagra's sons. O blessed goddess, carry thou my forefathers, Sagra's sons, to the region of heaven. O great river, on their account am I beseeching thee forsooth. Lomesa said, Ganga, the goddess saluted by the world, having heard these words of the king, was well pleased, and spake to Bhagiratha the following words, O great king, I am prepared to do what thou dost ask me, there is no doubt therein. But when I shall descend from the sky to the earth, the force of my fall will be difficult to sustain. O protector of men, in the three worlds there exists none who is able to sustain the same, excepting Shiva, the most praiseworthy of gods, the great Lord with the throat of sable blue. O Prince of a powerful arm, obtain the favor, by practicing austerities, of that same Shiva, giver of boons. That same God will sustain my descent upon his head. Thy desire he will fulfill, the desire, namely, to be of service to thy fathers, O king. Then the great king Bhagiratha, having heard the same, went to the Kailas hill, and betaking himself to a severe course of penances, at the expiration of a certain length of time obtained the favor of that worker of blessings, Shiva. And, O protector of men, that same best of men, in order that his forefathers might have a place in heaven secured to them, received from that very Shiva the fulfillment of his wish, namely the wish that the descending Ganga might be sustained. Thus ends the 109th section in the Tirthaitara Parva of the Vana Parva. Section 109, Tirthayatra Parva continued. Lomisa said, the blessed God, having heard what Bhagiratha had said, and with a view to doing what was agreeable to the residents of heaven, replied to the king, saying, so let it be. O most righteous of the protectors of men, O prince of a powerful arm. For thy sake I shall sustain the river of the gods, when she will take her descent from the sky, she who is pure and blessed and divine, O king, of a mighty arm. Saying this, he came to the snowy mountain, surrounded by his attendants, of awful mien, and with uplifted weapons of divers forms. And standing there, he said to Bhagiratha, the most praiseworthy of men, O prince of a powerful arm, do thou pray to the river, the daughter of the king of mountains. I shall sustain that most praiseworthy of rivers, when she falls down from the third region of the world, heaven. Having heard these words uttered by Shiva, the king became devout in heart, made obeisance and directed his thoughts towards Ganga. Then the delightful river, of pure water in being so thought of by the king, and seeing that the great Lord Shiva was standing to receive her fall, came down all of a sudden from the sky. And seeing that she had taken her leap from the sky, the gods, together with the mighty saints, the Gandharvas, the snakes, and the yakshas, assembled there as spectators. Then came down from the sky Ganga, the daughter of the snowy mountain, and her whirlpools were raging, and she was teeming with fishes and sharks. O king! She, directing her course towards the sea, separated herself into 3 streams, and her water was bestrewn with piles of froth, which looked like so many rows of white ganders, and crooked and tortuous in the movement of her body at places, and at others stumbling as it were, and covered with foam as with a robe, she went forward like a woman drunk. And elsewhere, by virtue of the roar of her waters, she uttered loud sounds. Thus assuming very many different aspects, when she fell from the sky, and reached the surface of the earth, she said to Bhagiratha, O great king! Show me the path that I shall have to take. O Lord of the earth! For thy sake have I descended to the earth. Having heard these words, King Bhagiratha directed his course towards the spot where lay those bodies of mighty Sagra's sons, in order that, O most praiseworthy of men, the holy water might flood the same. Having achieved the task of sustaining Ganga, Shiva, saluted by men, went to Kailas, the most praiseworthy of mountains, accompanied by the celestials. And the protector of men Bhagiratha, accompanied by Ganga, reached the sea, and the sea, the abode of Varuna, was quickly filled. And the king adopted Ganga as a daughter of himself, and at that spot offered libations of water to the names of his forefathers. Thus was his heart's wish fulfilled. Thus asked by thee, I have narrated the whole story how Ganga, running in 3 streams, was brought down to the earth for filling the sea, how the mighty saint had drunk up the sea for a particular reason, and how, O Lord, Vatapi, the slayer of Brahmanas, was destroyed by Agastya. Thus ends the 109th section in the Tirthaitara Parva of the Vana Parva. Section 110, Tirthayatra Parva continued. Vasampayana said, O chief of the Bharata race. Then the son of Kunti went at a slow pace to the two rivers Nanda and Aprananda, which had the virtue of destroying the dread of sin. And the protector of men having reached the healthy hill Hemkutha, beheld there very many strange and inconceivable sights. There the very utterance of words caused the gathering of clouds, and 1,000 volleys of stones. And people at its sight, were struck sad, and were unable to ascend the hill. There the winds blew for aye, and the heavens always poured down rains, and likewise the sounds of the recitation of the sacred writ were heard, yet nobody was seen. In the evening and in the morning would be seen the blessed fire that carries offerings to the gods, and their flies would bite and interrupt the practice of austerities. And there a sadness would overtake the soul, and people would become sick. The son of Pandu, having observed very many strange circumstances of this character, again addressed his questions to Lomisa with reference to these wonderful things. Lomisa said, O slayer of foes, O king, I am going to tell thee, as we heard it before, do thou attend to the same with intent mind. In this peak of Rishwa, there was once a saint known by that name, and his life had lasted for many 100 years. And he was devoted to penances and was greatly wrathful. And he, forsooth, for having been spoken to by others, from wrath addressed the hill thus, Whoever should utter any words here, thou must throw stones at him, and thou must call up the winds to prevent him from making any noise. This was what the saint said. And so at this place, as soon as a man utters any words, he is forbidden by a roaring cloud. O king, thus these deeds were performed by that great saint, and from wrath he also forbade other acts. O king, tradition says that when the gods of yore had come to the Nanda, suddenly came over there a number of men to look at the celestials. Those same gods at whose head stood Indra did not, however, like to be seen, and so they rendered this spot inaccessible, by raising obstructions in the form of hills. And from that day forward, O Kunti's son, men could not cast their eyes at any time on what looked like a hill, far less could they ascend the same. This big mountain is incapable of being seen by one who hath not led an austere life, nor can such a one ascend it. Therefore, O son of Kunti, keep thou thy tongue under control. Here at that time all those gods performed the best sacrificial rites, O Bharata's son. Even up to this day these marks thereof may be seen. This grass here hath the form of the sacred kusa grass. The ground here seemeth to be overspread with the sacred grass, and, O Lord of men, many of these trees here look like the spots for tying the sacrificial beasts. O Bharata's son, still the gods and saints have residence here, and their sacred fire is observed in the morning and in the evening. Here if one bathes, his sin is forthwith destroyed, O Kunti's son. O most praiseworthy of the race of Kuru, do thou therefore perform thy ablutions, together with thy younger brothers. Then after having washed thyself in the Nanda, thou wilt repair to the river Kaushiki, the spot where the most excellent and severest form of penances was practiced by Viswamitra. Then the king with his attendants, having washed his body there, proceeded to the river Kaushiki, which was pure and delightful and pleasant with cool water. Lomisa said, This is the pure divine river by name Kaushiki, O chief of Bharata's race. And this is the delightful hermitage of Viswamitra, conspicuous here. And this is a hermitage, with a holy name, belonging to Kasyapa of mighty soul, whose son was Rishyasringa, devoted to penances, and of passions under control. He by force of his penances caused Indra to reign, and that god, the slayer of the demons Vala and Vritra, dreading him, poured down rain during a drought. That powerful and mighty son of Kasyapa was born of a Hind. He worked a great marvel in the territory of Lomapta. And when the crops had been restored, King Lomapta gave his daughter Santa in marriage to him, as the son gave in marriage his daughter Savitri. Yudhishthira said, "How was the son of Kasyapa, Rishyasringa, born of a Hind? And how was he endowed with holiness, being the issue of a reprehensible sexual connection? And for what reason was Indra, the slayer of the demons Vala and Vritra, afraid of that same sagacious boy, and poured down rain during a period of drought? And how beautiful was that Princess Santa, pure in life, she who allured the heart of him when he had turned himself into a stag? And since the royal saint Lomapta is said to have been of a virtuous disposition, why was it that in his territory, Indra, the chastiser of the demon Paka, had withheld rain? O holy saint! All this in detail, exactly as it happened, thou wilt be pleased to narrate to me, for I am desirous of hearing the deeds of Rishyasringa's life." Lomesa said, "Hear how Rishyasringa, of dreaded name, was born as a son to Vibhandaka, who was a saint of the Brahmana caste, who had cultured his soul by means of religious austerities, whose seed never failed in causing generation, and who was learned and bright like the Lord of beings. And the father was highly honored, and the son was possessed of a mighty spirit, and, though a boy, was respected by aged men. And that son of Kasyapa, Vibhandaka, having proceeded to a big lake, devoted himself to the practice of penances. And that same saint, comparable to a god, labored for a long period. And once while he was washing his mouth in the waters, he beheld the celestial nymph Urvasi, whereupon came out his seminal fluid. And, O king, a Hind at that time lapped it up along with the water that she was drinking, being athirst, and from this cause she became with child. That same Hind had really been a daughter of the gods, and had been told of yore by the holy Brahma, the creator of the worlds, thou shalt be a Hind, and when in that form, thou shalt give birth to a saint, thou shalt then be freed. As destiny would have it, and as the word of the Creator would not be untrue, in that same Hind was born his, Vibhandaka's, son, a mighty saint. And Rishyasringa, devoted to penances, always passed his days in the forest. O king! There was a horn on the head of that magnanimous saint, and for this reason did he come to be known at the time by the name of Rishyasringa. And bearing his father, not a man had ever before been seen by him, therefore his mind, O protector of men, was entirely devoted to the duties of a continent life. At this very period there was a ruler of the land of Anga known by the name of Lomapta, who was a friend of Dasharatha. We have heard that he from love of pleasure had been guilty of a falsehood towards a Brahmana. And that same ruler of the world had at that time been shunned by all persons of the priestly class. And he was without a ministering priest to assist him in his religious rites. And the god of 1,000 eyes, Indra, suddenly abstained from giving rain in his territory, so that his people began to suffer, and O Lord of the earth! He questioned a number of Brahmanas, devoted to penances, of cultivated minds, and possessed of capabilities with reference to the matter of rain being granted by the Lord of gods, saying, "How may the heavens grant us the rain? Think of an expedient for this purpose." And those same cultured men, being thus questioned, gave expression to their respective views. And one among them, the best of saints, spake to that same king, saying, "O Lord of kings, the Brahmanas are angry with thee. Do some act therefore for appeasing them. O ruler of the earth, send for Rishyasringa, the son of a saint, resident of the forest, knowing nothing of the female sex, and always taking delight in simplicity. O king, if he, great in the practice of penances, should show himself in thy territory, forthwith rain would be granted by the heavens, herein I have no doubt at all. And, O king, having heard these words, Lomabda made atonement for his sins, and he went away, and when the Brahmanas had been appeased, he returned again, and seeing the king returned, the people were again glad at heart. Then the king of Anga convened the meeting of his ministers, proficient in giving counsel. And he took great pains in order to settle some plan for securing a visit from Rishyasringa. And, O unswerving prince, with those ministers, who were versed in all branches of knowledge, and exceedingly proficient in worldly matters, and had a thorough training in practical affairs, he at last settled a plan for gaining his object. And then he sent for a number of courtesans, women of the town, clever in everything. And when they came, that same ruler of the earth spake to them, saying, "Ye lovely women, ye must find some means to allure, and obtain the confidence of the son of the saint Rishyasringa, whom ye must bring over to my territory." And those same women, on the one hand afraid of the anger of the king, and on the other, dreading a curse from the saint, became sad and confounded, and declared the business to be beyond their power. One, however, among them, a hoary woman, thus spake to the king, "O great king, him whose wealth solely consists in penances, I shall try to bring over here. Thou wilt, however, have to procure for me certain things, in connection with the plan. In that case, I may be able to bring over the son of the saint Rishyasringa." Thereupon the king gave an order that all that she might ask for should be procured. And he also gave a good deal of wealth and jewels of various kinds. And then, O Lord of the earth, she took with herself a number of women endowed with beauty and youth, and went to the forest without delay. Thus ends the 110th section in the Tirthaitara Parva of the Vana Parva. Section 111, Tirthayatra Parva continued. Lomesa said, "O descendant of Bharata, she, in order to compass the object of the king, prepared a floating hermitage, both because the king had ordered so, and also because it exactly accorded with her plan. And the floating hermitage, containing artificial trees adorned with various flowers and fruits, and surrounded by divers shrubs and creeping plants, and capable of furnishing choice and delicious fruits, was exceedingly delightful, and nice, and pleasing, and looked as if it had been created by magic. Then she moored the vessel at no great distance from the hermitage of Kasyapa's son, and sent emissaries to survey the place where that same saint habitually went about. And then she saw an opportunity, and having conceived a plan in her mind, sent forward her daughter, a courtesan by trade, and of smart sense. And that clever woman went to the vicinity of the religious man, and arriving at the hermitage beheld the son of the saint. The courtesan said, "I hope, O saint, that is all well with the religious devotees. And I hope that thou hast a plentiful store of fruits and roots, and that thou takest delight in this hermitage. Verily I come here now to pay thee a visit. I hope the practice of austerities among the saints is on the increase. I hope that thy father's spirit hath not slackened, and that he is well pleased with thee, O Rishyasringa of the priestly caste. I hope thou prosecutest the studies proper for thee. Rishyasringa said, Thou art shining with luster, as if thou wert a mass of light. And I deem thee worthy of obeisance. Verily I shall give thee water for washing thy feet, and such fruits and roots also as may be liked by thee. For this is what my religion hath prescribed to me. Be thou pleased to take at thy pleasure thy seat on a mat made of the sacred grass, covered over with a black deerskin, and made pleasant and comfortable to sit upon. And where is thy hermitage? O Brahmana! Thou resemblest a god in thy mien. What is the name of this particular religious vow, which thou seemest to be observing now? The courtesan said, O son of Kasyapa, on the other side of yonder hill, which covers the space of 3 yojanas, is my hermitage, a delightful place. There, not to receive obeisance is the rule of my faith, nor do I touch water for washing my feet. I am not worthy of obeisance from persons like thee, but I must make obeisance to thee, O Brahmana. This is the religious observance to be practiced by me, namely, that thou must be clasped in my arms. Rishyasringa said, Let me give thee ripe fruits, such as gallnuts, myrabalans, karushas, ingudas from sandy tracts, and Indian fig. May it please thee to take a delight in them. Lomesa said, She, however, threw aside all those edible things and then gave him unsuitable things for food. And these were exceedingly nice and beautiful to see, and were very much acceptable to Rishyasringa. And she gave him garlands of an exceedingly fragrant scent, and beautiful and shining garments to wear, and first-rate drinks, and then played and laughed and enjoyed herself. And she at his side played with a ball, and while thus employed, looked like a creeping plant broken in two. And she touched his body with her own, and repeatedly clasped Rishyasringa in her arms. Then she bent and brake the flowery twigs from trees, such as the Sala, the Asoka and the Tilaka. And overpowered with intoxication, assuming a bashful look, she went on tempting the great saint's son. And when she saw that the heart of Rishyasringa had been touched, she repeatedly pressed his body with her own, and casting glances, slowly went away under the pretext that she was going to make offerings on the fire. On her departure, Rishyasringa became overpowered with love and lost his sense. His mind turned constantly to her, and felt itself vacant. And he began to sigh and seemed to be in great distress. At that moment appeared Vibhandaka, Kasyapa's son, he whose eyes were tawny like those of a lion, whose body was covered with hair down to the tip of the nails, who was devoted to studies proper for his caste, and whose life was pure and was passed in religious meditation. He came up and saw that his son was seated alone, pensive and sad, his mind upset and sighing again and again with upturned eyes. And Vibhandaka spake to his distressed son, saying, My boy, why is it that thou art not hewing the logs for fuel? I hope thou hast performed the ceremony of burnt offering today. I hope thou hast polished the sacrificial ladles and spoons, and brought the calf to the milch cow, whose milk furnisheth materials for making offerings on the fire. Verily thou art not in thy wonted state, O son. Thou seemest to be pensive, and to have lost thy sense. Why art thou so sad today? Let me ask thee, who hath been to this place today? Thus ends the 111th section in the Tirthaitara Parva of the Vana Parva. Section 112, Tirthayatra Parva continued. Rishyasringa said, "Here came today a religious student with a mass of hair on his head. And he was neither short nor tall. And he was of a spirited look and a golden complexion, and endued with eye large as lotuses, and he was shining and graceful as a god. And rich was his beauty blazing like the sun, and he was exceedingly fair with eyes graceful and black. And his twisted hair was blue-black and neat and long and of a fragrant scent and tied up with strings of gold. A beautiful ornament was shining on his neck which looked like lightning in the sky. And under the throat he had 2 balls of flesh without a single hair upon them and of an exceedingly beautiful form. And his waist was slender to a degree and his navel, neat, and smooth also was the region about his ribs. Then again there shone a golden string from under his cloth, just like this waist string of mine. And there was something on his feet of a wonderful shape which gave forth a jingling sound. Upon his wrists likewise was tied a pair of ornaments that made a similar sound and looked just like this rosary here. And, when he walked, his ornaments uttered a jingling sound like those uttered by delighted ganders upon a sheet of water. And he had on his person garments of a wonderful make. These clothes of mine are by no means beautiful like those. And his face was wonderful to behold, and his voice was calculated to gladden the heart, and his speech was pleasant like the song of the male blackbird. And while listening to the same I felt touched to my inmost soul. And as a forest in the midst of the vernal season assumes a grace only when it is swept over by the breeze, so, O Father, he of an excellent and pure smell looks beautiful when fanned by the air. And his mass of hair is nearly tied up and remains adhering to the head and forehead evenly sundered in 2. And his 2 eyes seemed to be covered with wonderful chakravaka birds of an exceedingly beautiful form. And he carried upon his right palm a wonderful globe of fruit, which reaches the ground and again leaps up to the sky in a strange way. And he beats it and turns himself round and whirls like a tree moved by the breeze. And when I looked at him, O Father, he seemed to be a son of the celestials, and my joy was extreme, and my pleasure unbounded. And he elapsed my body, took hold of my matted hair, and bent down my mouth, and, mingling his mouth with my own, uttered a sound that was exceedingly pleasant. And he doth not care for water for washing his feet, nor for those fruits offered by me. And he told me that such was the religious observance practiced by him. And he gave unto me a number of fruits. Those fruits were tasteful unto me, these here are not equal to them in taste. They have not got any rind nor any stone within them, like these. And he of a noble form gave me to drink water of an exceedingly fine flavor, and having drunk it, I experienced great pleasure, and the ground seemed to be moving under my feet. And these are the garlands beautiful and fragrant and twined with silken threads that belong to him. And he, bright with fervent piety, having scattered these garlands here, went back to his own hermitage. His departure hath saddened my heart, and my frame seems to be in a burning sensation. And my desire is to go to him as soon as I can, and to have him every day walk about here. O Father, let me this very moment go to him. Pray, what is that religious observance which is being practiced by him? As he of a noble piety is practicing penances, so I am desirous to live the same life with him. My heart is yearning after similar observances. My soul will be in torment if I see him not. Thus ends the 112th section in the Tirthayatara Parva of the Vana Parva. Section 113, Tirthayatra Parva continued. Vibhandaka said, "Those are, O son, Rakshasas. They walk about in that wonderfully beautiful form. Their strength is unrivaled and their beauty great. And they always meditate obstruction to the practice of penances. And, O my boy, they assume lovely forms and try to allure by diverse means. And those fierce beings hurled the saints, the dwellers of the woods, from blessed regions won by their pious deeds. And the saint who hath control over his soul, and who is desirous of obtaining the regions where go the righteous, ought to have nothing to do with them. And their acts are vile, and their delight is in causing obstruction to those who practice penance, therefore a pious man should never look at them. And, O son, those were drinks unworthy to be drunk, being as they were spirituous liquors consumed by unrighteous men. And these garlands, also, bright and fragrant and of various hues, are not intended for saints." Having thus forbidden his son by saying that those were wicked demons, Vibhandaka went in quest of her. And when by 3 days' search he was unable to trace where she was, he then came back to his own hermitage. In the meanwhile, when the son of Kasyapa had gone out to gather fruits, then that very courtesan came again to tempt Rishyasringa in the manner described above. And as soon as Rishyasringa had her in sight, he was glad and hurriedly rushing towards him said, "Let us go to thy hermitage before the return of my father." Then, O king, those same courtesans by contrivances made the only son of Kasyapa enter their bark, and unmoored the vessel. And by various means they went on delighting him, and at length came to the side of Anga's king. And leaving then that floating vessel of an exceedingly white tint upon the water, and having placed it within sight of the hermitage, he similarly prepared a beautiful forest known by the name of the floating hermitage. The king, however, kept that only son of Vibhandaka within that part of the palace destined for the females, when of a sudden he beheld that rain was poured by the heavens, and that the world began to be flooded with water. And Lomapta, the desire of his heart fulfilled, bestowed his daughter Santa on Rishyasringa in marriage. And with a view to appease the wrath of his father, he ordered kin to be placed, and fields to be ploughed, by the road that Vibhandaka was to take, in order to come to his son. And the king also placed plentiful cattle and stout cowherds, and gave the latter the following order: "When the great saint Vibhandaka should inquire of you about his son, ye must join your palms and say to him that these cattle, and these ploughed fields belong to his son, and that ye are his slaves, and that ye are ready to obey him in all that he might bid." Now the saint, whose wrath was fierce, came to his hermitage, having gathered fruits and roots and searched for his son. But not finding him, he became exceedingly wroth. And he was tortured with anger, and suspected it to be the doing of the king. And therefore, he directed his course towards the city of Champa, having made up his mind to burn the king, his city, and his whole territory. And on the way he was fatigued and hungry, when he reached those same settlements of cowherds, rich with cattle. And he was honored in a suitable way by those cowherds, and then spent the night in a manner befitting a king. And having received very great hospitality from them, he asked them, saying, "To whom, O cowherds, do ye belong?" Then they all came up to him and said, "All this wealth hath been provided for thy son." At different places he was thus honored by that best of men, and saw his son who looked like the god Indra in heaven. And he also beheld there his daughter-in-law, Santa, looking like lightning issuing from a cloud. And having seen the hamlets and the cowpens provided for his son, and having also beheld Santa, his great resentment was appeased. And O King of men, Vibhandaka expressed great satisfaction with the very ruler of the earth, and the great saint, whose power rivaled that of the sun and the god of fire, placed there his son, and thus spake, as soon as a son is born to thee, and having performed all that is agreeable to the king, to the forest must thou come without fail. And Rishyasringa did exactly as his father said, and went back to the place where his father was. And, O King of men, Santa obediently waited upon him as in the firmament the star Rohini waits upon the moon, or as the fortunate Arundhati waits upon Vasishtha, or as Lopamudra waits upon Agastya. And as Damayanti was an obedient wife to Nala, or as Sachi is to the god who holdeth the thunderbolt in his hand, or as Indrasena, Narayana's daughter, was always obedient to Mugala, so did Santa wait affectionately upon Rishyasringa, when he lived in the wood. This is the holy hermitage which belonged to him. Beautifying the great lake here, it bears holy fame. Here perform thy ablutions and have thy desire fulfilled. And having purified thyself, direct thy course towards other holy spots. Thus ends the 113th section in the Tirthaltara Parva of the Vana Parva. Thus ends the Tirthaltara Parva of the Vana Parva. Thus ends the Vana Parva of the Mahabharata of Krishna-Dwaipayana Vyasa. If you enjoyed this audiobook, please like and subscribe to be notified of when new audiobooks are uploaded. Thank you for listening and learning. Shanti.